A folded letter had been sitting in Margaret O'Sea's coat pocket for 14 months when she walked onto the Family Feud stage. She had found it in the sympathy cards after her husband Franklin's funeral, tucked between a card from his co-workers and an envelope from their church. It was not in an envelope. It was folded in thirds, the way business letters are folded, and it was written in handwriting she did not recognize, and it was addressed to no one. It began, "I want you to know that he was a good man." It ended with a name she had never heard and a phone number. In the middle were 7 paragraphs that had changed the shape of everything Margaret thought she knew about the 29 years she had been married to Franklin O'Sea. She had not called the number. For 14 months, she had not called. She carried the letter in her coat pocket because she could not put it down, and she could not open it again, and she could not throw it away. And so it lived in the pocket, folded in thirds, and she went about her life, working, shopping, visiting her grandchildren, sitting in the same church pew where she had sat beside Franklin for 29 years, with the letter pressed against her ribs. Nobody in that studio knew that Margaret O'Sea was carrying 14 months of unanswered questions in her coat. Franklin O'Sea had died in October 2021. A stroke, early on a Wednesday morning, quick and without warning in the way that strokes sometimes are. There one moment, gone in 12 hours. The doctors saying there was nothing to be done, and Margaret sitting in a hospital room holding a hand that was still warm and saying his name until it no longer made sense to say it. He had been 67 years old. They had been married since she was 28 and he was 29. Their son Kwame had flown in from Houston. Their daughter Abina had driven from Savannah. The funeral had been large. Franklin had been well liked, a man with a wide professional and social life. And Margaret had stood at the receiving line for 3 hours and received 300 people whose faces blurred together the way faces blur when grief is acute. One face had not blurred. A woman Margaret had never seen, not at any gathering, not in any photograph, not in any conversation in 29 years of marriage, had come through the receiving line near the end. She was perhaps 50. She wore a black dress and no jewelry, and she had been crying in the specific private way that people cry when they are trying not to let anyone see. She had taken Margaret's hand and held it for a moment without speaking, and then walked away. Margaret had registered her, the red eyes, the tight composure, the particular quality of her grief, which was not the grief of a colleague or a distant acquaintance, and had let the next person in line step forward. She had found the letter that evening between the cards. For 14 months, she had not called the number. She had read the letter 17 times. She had come to understand, from 7 paragraphs in an unfamiliar hand, that her husband had had a relationship. Not in the years they were married. The letter was specific about that, emphatic about that. But in the years before they met, a relationship serious enough to produce a child who was now 45 years old and living in Atlanta, and who had known about Franklin all of her life and had honored his wish, through all of it, to keep his distance from his first family. The child's name was Diane. She was the woman who had cried at the funeral, and she had wanted Margaret to know about her not to cause pain, but because, the letter said, she had been watching from a distance for 29 years, and when the man died, she had no one to grieve with. She had no one who knew who he was to her. She was asking, not for relationship, not for anything. She was asking only for acknowledgement, that he had existed in her life, that she had been real to him. She was asking Margaret to know she existed. For 14 months, Margaret had carried that letter and had not called. She was not sure what she was waiting for. She was not angry at Diane. The letter was too careful for anger. She was not angry at Franklin. The relationship had been before her time, and Franklin had apparently honored a boundary that, the letter implied, Diane herself had agreed to. She was something more complicated than angry. She was a woman who had been married for 29 years and had believed, as you believe things after 29 years, that she knew the complete shape of her husband's life. She was discovering that the shape had an extra room she had never been shown. Margaret had come to Family Feud with her son Kwame, her daughter Abina, her sister Comfort, and her friend Pauline from church. She had not told Kwame or Abina about the letter. She had not told anyone except Pauline, who had read it and wept and said, "You will know when the time is right to call." The time had not felt right for 14 months. And then Steve Harvey asked her during the contestant introduction what she was most proud of in her life. She said, 29 years of a good marriage. Steve said, "Tell me what made it good." She looked at him. She said, "Honesty. We were always honest with each other." And then something happened behind her eyes, a brief thing, a shadow, that Steve Harvey saw the way he sees everything on that stage, completely. "Did something happen," he said quietly, "that made you question that?" The studio fell completely silent. Margaret looked at her hands. She looked at Kwame and Abina. She looked at the coat on the back of her chair. Then she said, "There is a letter in my coat pocket. I've been carrying it for 14 months. Steve did not speak. He walked forward slowly and stood at the edge of the podium. He waited. Margaret told him about the funeral, the woman in black, the red eyes, the letter folded in thirds. She told him what the letter contained, not the specific words, but the shape of it. A child, before the marriage, a life at a distance, a request for acknowledgement. She told it with extraordinary care, protecting Diane's dignity, protecting Franklin's, protecting her own. She was a woman describing something she had not yet decided what to do with. And she was describing it out loud for the first time in 14 months. When she stopped, the studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey had taken several steps back from the podium. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. Kwame, on the family side of the stage, was looking at the floor. Abina had her hand over her mouth. The crew near the production board had stopped entirely. Then Steve said, "What does Diane deserve to know? Not what does Margaret deserve, not what is the right thing." He asked what Diane deserved. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. She said, "She deserves to know that I read the letter, and that I believe her, and that she is not invisible. And the crew behind that camera," Steve said very quietly, "is going to make sure that message reaches her, because she's watching. I believe she's watching right now." He paused. "Let me tell you something," he said. "An old man at a gas station once told me that God's got a plan bigger than your pain. I didn't know what that meant when I was sleeping in my car with nothing. I know what it means now. It means that sometimes the hardest things, the things you carry in your coat pocket for 14 months, they are not punishments. They are invitations to a larger understanding of the person you loved, of the life he lived before you, of the child who has been carrying her own version of this for 45 years. He looked at Margaret. "Because 40 years ago, I was a person who needed someone to say, 'I see you. You are not invisible.' And nobody said it. I am saying it to Diane now." "Stop everything," he said. He was already moving. "This has never happened in this show's 45-year history. We are stopping the game." He walked Margaret to the front of the stage. He said, "What do you want to say to Diane right now?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she would have liked him. He was exactly what she said he was. He was a good man. The studio fell completely silent for the third time. Steve pulled out his phone. His foundation team had, during the taping, located Diane through the contact information in the letter, which Margaret gave them during the commercial break. Diane was contacted. She was watching the episode live from her apartment in Atlanta, 14 miles away. Steve's team drove her to the studio before the taping ended. She arrived backstage during the prize announcement. What happened after, the meeting between Margaret and Diane, which the cameras captured but which the production team has honored both women's request to keep partially private, lasted 40 minutes. Both women have described it publicly in only the broadest terms. Margaret has said, "She has his eyes. I wasn't expecting that." Diane has said, "She called me by my name. That was all I needed." Both families received the $25,000 prize. The competing family, the Coleman family from Augusta, requested that their share be donated to a grief support charity, which it was. When the episode aired 10 weeks later, the moment Steve said, "I see you, you are not invisible," became the most clipped line in the show's history. Shared across grief counseling communities, family estrangement forums, donor conception groups, and platforms focused on family secrets and disclosure. It reached 290 million views in 9 days. The hashtag #YouAreNotInvisible was used as a resource link for grief and family complexity support. 3 months after the taping, Margaret and Diane had coffee. They have met 6 times in the year since. They are not family exactly. They are not strangers. They are 2 women who each love the same man differently and are learning carefully what that means. Kwame and Abina know about Diane now. Abina said when Margaret finally showed her the letter, she was carrying this alone for 14 months too. That word also changed something. The Franklin Osei Grief Bridge, established through Steve Harvey's foundation, provides counseling and facilitated dialogue support for families navigating posthumous family disclosures, the discoveries that come after death, when the living are left to make sense of what was kept. In its first year, more than 400 families were served. Its motto came from Margaret's words. He was a good man. Today, the letter still exists. Margaret has stopped carrying it in her coat pocket. It lives in a drawer with the sympathy cards, properly filed, properly placed, among the other records of Franklin's life. She says she knows now what it is. It is not a betrayal. It is a proof of something. That her husband was loved in ways she did not know. And that love, even the complicated kind, even the kind that lived at a distance for 45 years, does not diminish what was shared at home. She says that is enough. She means it. If this incredible story of loss, love, and an unexpected door touched your heart, subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who is carrying something they haven't found the right moment for yet. Because as Margaret proved, sometimes the most important things arrive folded in thirds, tucked between the other cards. And the time to open them is when you are finally ready to let them be real.